In a world filled with questions, there's one role that often leaves us searching for the right words: parenting.
Introducing What to Say When, a podcast that equips parents with tools to navigate the beautiful and challenging journey of raising children.
Together, we'll explore a wide range of topics, from handling tough conversations to nurturing resilience to helping you become a confident and compassionate parent.
What to Say When.
Because the right words can make all the difference.
Oh,
Yeah.
yay!
Oh, the first special guest of the season.
Yeah.
She's not new to the Rolling Hills Podcast Network, but new to this particular season of What to Say When. It's Kathy Koon, our counseling ministry director here at church.
Kathy.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited about just sitting here with you all and having these conversations.
It's going to be awesome.
Without anybody having to say how old they are, because we don't want to do that, we would also just kind of get to acknowledge how old is the youngest kid among the four of us?
2.
That's
Chase
Ellis,
has
age
the
2.
youngest.
And how old is the oldest kid that is among us?
I'm going to go 27.
Kathy, that's impossible.
You
It
win.
is impossible.
You
But
win.
way to go. You win. Look at that. Like, we have kids between 2 and 27 and some teenagers and preteens and young adults and babies in the mix. And so that's kind of a cool breadth of the parenting journey. And so
Yeah.
we're excited about today.
Yeah, I love it. And so, okay, before we start today,
Oh, yeah, you've got a topic for us.
I have a topic for us
Okay.
because speaking of all the kids and all the different ages,
I'm hearing that people like this in the podcast as much as anything
Oh,
else.
good.
I don't know
love
what that
it.
says about our content, but I think
They actually don't even listen to the back
Yeah,
end.
they're
they
just like,
stop
what are
after
they
the
talking about
conversation
today?
started. It's okay.
Okay, I'm on my phone a lot, like too much. Like that's a whole podcast. I get it.
Why are you trying to
I
shame
get
us?
it. But I use it a lot. It's like my other computer.
Confession.
Yes.
But I was thinking, this is confession moment, but I was thinking through all the apps that I use a lot, and I thought it might be kind of fun for us to share, like if there's an app that really helps us, not necessarily it can be in parenting.
That
it could
helps
be
us?
or one that you use a lot, like one that, like this is the best game right now out there. Maybe that would help somebody de-stress.
Okay.
I don't know.
Chick-fil-A
okay.
app counting?
Maybe
Okay.
Chick-fil-A.
Chick-fil-A.
Yeah, I don't know. Okay, so I have a few that I use a lot, but I wanted to hear what y'all's are. I'll share mine. Do you have an app that you use a lot that you feel like you guys should download this app?
I don't know.
Chase, what do you use a lot?
Gmail.
Okay, so there's this thing called Gmail, parents, and you
Gmail,
can
you want to
I use it
correspond
way
with
too much.
others
Okay.
so much quicker
You know,
than snail mail.
I will say that I'll add another one personal. It's called Pause.
You've talked about this,
Yeah. And it
Not
gives
here,
you just incremental times, whether that's 1 minute, 3 minute, 5 minute, 10 minute. It kind of builds you up to where you can have a time throughout your day to pause, reflect, and pray. And so, yeah, that Pause is one of those that I cherish, I find useful in my own personal journey.
And you pause.
And I pause.
I love it.
It pops up on my screen every day. You need a pause. And I'm in the
You
middle
don't
of something
snooze
busy.
it.
I'm like, I can't do it right now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I love
do
it.
snooze a lot.
You
but
snooze it. I'll pause later.
I'll pause later.
It's too much happening. Kathy, do you have any apps that you like?
Okay. Yes, I have a whole, I guess you would call it a folder on my phone
Yes.
of weather apps. I am obsessed.
You're a
I am,
weather
I am
person.
obsessed with the weather. I can almost always tell you what the weather is going to be.
What's your favorite?
And
Your
well,
favorite
honestly, I
weather
have
or
different.
favorite app?
AccuWeather, Weather
Oh
Channel.
no, I have all of them. And even if I am looking outside and it's storming, I will check my weather apps to make sure it's actually
It's actually
raining
storming?
outside. Yes.
Do you follow the Twitter guy, like the Nashville Weather RX?
yes,
kind of whatever
I
that
do.
is?
Yeah,
I
that's
do.
so
Nashville
funny.
Weather RX. It's fantastic.
I
Super
do,
accurate.
yeah.
Can you actually just set an alert on your phone to notify me whenever bad weather's coming?
I will. Yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
that'd be awesome.
I would want to be in that text group too.
Absolutely. I love it. I love the weather.
That
I
is
would
so fun.
love to say that mine is something super impressive, like Runkeeper. I do have it, and it keeps reminding me that I haven't used it in a while. But it's probably just something like Instagram or Twitter, which is sad. And
No.
but I mean, it is a kind of a news feed or whatever.
Yeah.
It kind of helps you kind of know what's going on and
Yeah.
connect or whatever. But it's probably one of the social media or my calculator. Take that, calculus teacher who told me I wouldn't need to remember things in life. You're not going to always have a calculator with you wherever you go.
Yeah, you
See there?
will.
Yes,
you
you
do,
will, actually.
and you do
Yeah.
everywhere. One of mine is really boring, but it's very helpful for Keith and me, for my husband and me. We use a to-do list. It's like, I think it's just Microsoft To Do.
Oh, yeah.
But we put all of our, like, we have lists for like what meals we're doing this week. Like I put them on there, and then we have another one that's for shopping list. So if we need whatever from Target or whatever from Kroger, and we both just see it in the same place. So if one of us happens to be out and can stop, it doesn't take a whole bunch of phone calls to figure out what we need.
That's
it's
useful.
so silly, but like it has just helped us.
And does
I
it
want
check
you to
off?
show me
Like
how to
if you
do
check
that.
something, you check them off.
Show you how
but
to
it doesn't
use it?
disappear.
Yes.
So if you accidentally check something off, or you realize you need two of something, you can go back and see what you checked off previously. Like just little like
What
tools
is it
like that.
called?
It's Microsoft To Do, like so boring. But like
I need to know. I need to.
but there's a million of them out there like that. But a to-do list that's shared
That's fantastic.
is really helpful.
A shared
to-do list. Yeah.
That's great.
It's really helpful. And he's an Android guy and I'm an Apple girl. So sharing notes doesn't work as well. So honestly, that was our go around. But
That's hard. That's like when an Auburn fan
Who
marries an
puts-
Alabama fan kind of thing. Like that's a mixed
yeah,
kind
it's
of marriage
hard,
deal.
but we
Rough.
make
Who
it work.
puts
We
more
make it
stuff
work.
on the
Oh, for
to-do
sure me.
list?
Oh, for sure
And then
me.
who checks more stuff off
Oh, for
of the
sure me.
Okay.
But honestly, he is fantastic at using it. And you know what he does do? Like major credit to him. He goes into the Kroger app or the Target app or whatever and clips the coupons. So he's honestly, his job is just as valuable as
Wow.
me adding to the list.
I really hope that Susan is not listening to this because I am definitely going to hear, Keith Akers clips the coupons.
I'm sorry, Susan.
That's okay. No,
I
it's
love
going to be
it.
to me.
Okay,
Oh, man.
I love it. Great
Okay,
apps.
this
good
is a great
suggestions.
segue. The idea isn't
Is it a
the
good
check
segue?
mark really
Is it?
good?
It's check mark.
Doesn't the check mark
It feels
make you
great.
feel good
Yes.
about yourself? Which is a great segue into the fact that we are talking about self-worth today. Which Kathy, that's obviously why we invited you, because we just recognize our need for extra input and extra expertise where this topic is concerned, and extra experience. And so we're thrilled that you're here. I'm going to full-on disclaimer acknowledge the fact that as we dove deep into this, and maybe it was just me, but I think you guys are there too, we recognized that this topic of self-worth, what do we do when our kids are struggling with it? How do we develop resilient kids? It is way bigger than the time that we have allotted for this conversation, even to promote other opportunities for people to investigate and have those conversations. So we are committing ourselves today. You want to raise your right hands and say, I will do this. We will come back to this conversation at a future episode. Kathy, that means you're going to say yes to another invitation.
I'm in.
Thanks, Kathy.
To come back and keep this conversation going. So at any point today where we navigate to the spot where we've just got to stop and say, okay, that's the end of this episode, and we really didn't come to any great conclusions, that's okay, because we're going to come back to this. And I think that's a good deal. It is a really big topic. And in order to start it well, we ought to just go with a definition on the outset. How are we going to define self-worth and what it looks like for us to build a healthy self-esteem in the life of our kids? What are the definitions?
I think a running definition for us could be this: self-worth or self-esteem can be defined as confidence in your worth or ability, a measure of how valuable or worthwhile you see yourself. Your sense of self begins and ends with you and is dependent on your ability to hang on to the essence of who you are. So that could be a running definition for us.
I think it's a good one. And nuts and bolts, it's just basically how you see yourself, and how you perceive what you bring to any other opportunity in life or any other conversation at the table. I read that regarding kids, it's fundamental to adolescent development, childhood development, adolescent. It's fundamental to their psychological well-being. It's fundamental to our psychological well-being. It's fundamental to a person understanding who they are. And it's linked to a person being more resilient, having a greater sense of control, which is a weird conversation to have because as believers, we want to recognize that we're not in control, that God's in control. But one of the fruits of the Spirit is self-control. And so we do know what we can control in any situation. It's also linked to the capacity to act independently, which we're not out to raise great kids. We're out to raise great Christ-following adults in the future. And so we want there to be some sort of independence. It's linked to feeling secure, and your overall sense. It integrates into everything, even the other conversations that we're having in the life of this podcast. And so I'm glad we're tackling this topic today.
Yeah. That's great.
Sounds good?
Yep.
All right. So, Kathy, what are the signs? How can we as parents like observe or just intuitively know what are the signs? Like, what are the issues that we need to look for in our kids to know that they're struggling with self-worth or that they don't have an appropriate self-esteem? give us some nuggets that we can look for in the lives of our kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's so interesting is I was thinking about this topic, when we think about self-esteem, often we think about this in maybe late elementary, middle school, high school, right? And I would venture to say that all of us probably still struggle with what our worth is, right? But if you look back, if you have little ones, think about the times that they came home and they were no longer someone's best friend, or they weren't invited to the little club, right? The school preschool club, or whatever it is. And so they're learning about their worth from very, very, very early on. And as parents, we are a main contributor, a main source of positive and negative experiences in developing who they are. What we're going to talk about is who they are in the Lord, right? Yeah. From such an early time period. And then the older they get, the more access to other people and experiences and rejection or approval that they will receive. And so as parents, we just play such a crucial role in that. And some of the things that we can look for in our kiddos, even early on, is things like fear of failure, fear of not wanting to start something new because they're afraid that they're not going to do it well. Or maybe something that they used to be interested in, they're no longer interested in. The way that they speak about themselves, I'm disgusting, I'm ugly, nobody likes me, isolating, wanting to change the way that they look, or are you noticing that they change the way they act when they're around different groups of people? And I would also say we probably fall into that really well. Or maybe hypersensitive to rejection, what people think, jealousy. And so you're looking for changes in their behavior, changes in emotions, changes in how they interact with other people, changes in maybe types of relationships that they have. If they're super, super mindful of maybe one particular person and what that person thinks and what that person might say about them, or just isolating from all types of different groups of people. But really, you're looking for what are the things that are coming out of their mouth? What are the words they're saying? What are the things that they're doing? And are they different from maybe things that they've done in the past?
I'm so glad you acknowledged that, because our daughter's 7, so we're in that phase. Typically, when you think about self-worth, you think, okay, the kids who struggle with this, or kids who are creating their self-worth, or that 4th grade up. You know, you got the middle schooler who's really going through all these changes, and then you got the high schoolers as new friend groups, or they're transitioning from 8th grade to 9th grade. They're trying to figure out the new school, and they're getting feedback about maybe who they are, or how they see themselves. But really, it goes a lot younger, and acknowledging that, you know, whenever they do come home and they have somebody didn't play with them on the playground or whatever it is, to not breeze past it and acknowledge it for what it is, and say they're writing a story here about their self-worth and about their self-esteem that we can contribute to. So I do think it's important to acknowledge that it's all age ranges.
And there's a foundational piece to this conversation that we acknowledge as believers and leaders in the church, is that Romans 3:23, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Like, there is just this base level of who we are by nature as sinners, and right from the very beginning. And I think there's far more to this conversation that we just tip the iceberg in terms of unpacking what the enemy did when he tempted Adam and Eve with that particular fruit. That knowledge of good and evil, that awareness of who you are as an imago Dei, the image of God, but then also who you are now as a sinner, and what that looks like. Even in Genesis 11, when they're wanting to build a tower, it wasn't so they could reach God. It was so they could make a name for themselves. Like, there's always that striving. What's my name? What's my identity? What role do I have? What role do I play? And anytime we fall short of that, which we will because of sin, how do we grapple with that? How do we reconcile the fact that we're sinners, and yet we're created in the almighty image of God, and what an incredible creator he is. So there's this balance, this yin yang to, yes, I'm a sinner, but I'm created. I'm created by Almighty God to bear his image in the world. And once we've experienced salvation and we're redeemed by Jesus, we have a place. And I think the world just continues to want to take that place and take that image and take that understanding away from us. And so we live in that in between of knowing that we're sinners, just acknowledging that we're not perfect, and yet grappling with what we are as an image bearer of Christ. It's a hard thing to do for me as an adult. It's hard for me to even wrap my mind around the definition of it, much less implant that into the life of my kids. And so we want to talk about what helps foster a really positive self-image in the life of our kids. What are the things that we want to lean into the most?
I mean, first and foremost is who they are because of God's love for them. Yeah. And, the world speaks so loudly that who we are is because of what we look like or what we've accomplished. It's all about what we've done to earn our identity. But the Bible is the complete opposite of that, right? Jesus Christ is all about what he did for us while we were yet sinners. And it's just so contradictory what the Bible teaches, what we are wanting to teach our children in the home, and then what the world is speaking so loudly.
Oh, yeah.
I think that's really good, because I think when we foster positive self-image or those kind of things, I think it's easy to do that in terms of comparing to somebody else on that. Well, at least you can do this, or at least they can't do this, but at least you could do this, instead of looking through, continually going back into, going back to what God says about them and who they are. And we go back to Genesis 1:27. You already mentioned it, we created an image of God. You got Psalm 139, you're fearfully and wonderfully made. Yeah. God created uniquely and wonderfully. And Ephesians 2:10 is that you're God's workmanship. And going back to these verses, I think remind us, and I think you have to always go back to reminders of our intrinsic worth as creations of God and his deep love for us. And I think by understanding his deep love for us and self-worth, we have to do it through God's word, right? It can't happen any other way. It can't happen by comparing to things of this world, or you have to really go back to what God says about who they are.
Yeah, because there's some things, the world is prompting us, like Kathy said, with those loud images all the time.
Yeah.
And there's some stereotypical ones. Like, I think we can acknowledge as much as gender identity and gender roles, and we are going to get to that as a conversation of a podcast at some point, but there is some sort of stereotypical image that is kind of put on kids at a really young age of what's masculine, what's feminine, what's worthy of love and admiration and even attraction. Like, what does the world tell us about those things? And whenever you get to that point in life, maybe it's middle school, maybe it's high school, when you start to realize, I don't look like, sound like, act like whether it's the whole world or just my social sphere at school says is valuable, then I must not be valuable because I don't measure up to that. I'm not as athletic. I'm not as outgoing. I'm not as whatever you want to fill in the blank with. Then you start to compare. And we've already said before, comparison leads to depression. And part of that self-worth is just evaluating yourself in the context of what is considered by society good or beautiful or awesome. And whenever you start to feel a deficiency in those places, it can lead to feelings of low self-worth, self-esteem.
That's good.
Yeah.
When we talk about fostering that positive self-image, I think one of the ways to do that is to, and we said this a minute ago, is to be observant, is to really put on new ears and new eyes as a parent. I'm doing that right now. I know with a kid going into middle school, I'm hearing things differently than I heard them before. It's kind of like what you were talking about, Kathy, not just from my child, but from the friends around my child, from the media that is geared towards her, and even from friends and family that are in our sphere, things that they might say that they're not thinking through that lens. I mean, man, I better get a salad. I'm feeling huge today. Things like that, like silly little simple things that we just flippantly say. And I started realizing, like as a parent with my kid going through that stage, this might, in light of what we're looking at right now, in light of what we're talking about, this is going to ring differently to my child than it did to me in the season that I'm in. And so we had to have conversations about that even with friends and family. Hey, can we be careful about the language that we use because we're having this conversation right now? So almost combating negative image to help foster,
Positive
and
image.
replace it with,
that's
this
good.
is so good for me. Like this food is so good for me, as opposed to I have to do this because
of, yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I feel like I know the answer to this, but I want to hear from you based on what you just said, and you too, Kathy. How important is the image that we have of ourselves when we're talking about fostering? Like, how important is what I think about me and what I say about me
As an
important
adult,
as an adult,
parent.
100%.
and what my kids pick up on?
It started with me
Yeah.
when we were having that conversation, and when my kid was at that stage. It started with my husband and me talking about what things are we saying at home that we don't do. And that's what I'm talking about, putting on new eyes and new ears and observing in a different way than you have been. And really paying attention to every word that comes out of my mouth, and the ways that I shop, the ways that I just address all kinds of things around us had to adjust a little bit. But I mean,
No,
you're going to have the
absolutely. I mean, kids are smart and
Yeah.
they are observant, and the things that we're saying. Not that we are not going to do this perfectly. We just aren't.
Hallelujah.
We just aren't.
We can acknowledge that.
But
yeah.
Yes, but the things that we're saying need to match the things that we're doing.
Yeah.
And we can't get out of this conversation without talking about, it's really going to come down to the heart behind why we're saying what we're saying, why we're doing what we're doing. And, I found with my kids, there were different kids that struggled with different areas. And so I needed to be really aware of the things that were coming out of my mouth, even in the way that I was maybe not on purpose, but comparing them to one another or comparing them to what I wanted to be or what I wasn't or what I thought they should be doing. And so you have to be so careful about what you're watching, what you're taking in, what you're saying, what you're doing, because they're watching those things. And if we're modeling, as women, I must look a certain way, I must eat this certain way because I'm worried about what I think or because I'm worried about what other people think, then why wouldn't I think that my child would do the same? But if I'm speaking about food, I'm speaking about exercise as I'm taking care of my body because I'm a representative of the Lord and everything that God has given me. I want to be a good steward of it. Then that's a different conversation.
Can I throw a wrinkle in here?
Go for it.
I think as we look at this, fostering positive self-image cannot happen if we're devaluing other people.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if our kids are watching that happen, I think that they take on also this negative perspective of self-image that they can internalize as well on them. If mom and dad think that way about them, or if they, we're right now also in a political season, and so if they have that view of that person, and it feels like they're kind of devaluing the person who's made in the image of God, what does that say to the next generation?
Does
that make sense?
A whole, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up. So it's not just the thing that we have to be aware of when I'm tearing myself down or I'm using negative talk towards my kids. When I use negative talk towards other people, they're not in the room, it's just about them. That can put some sort of image in my kid's mind that attribute or that action is not good. And it may not be, but when we do that and then they take that on, I can see how that would be such a challenge later in life. I read this whole list. I was looking up a lot of things and trying to read as much as I could, leaning into this. Like, what are some things that foster a negative self-image? And some of them were super obvious to me, which I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And some of them were like, oh, that's a big surprise. Obviously, pure victimization, like kids who are struggling with a bully or somebody that's using negative words about them or to them. I mean, the idea of sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me. I can't think of a worse lie. It's just terrible. And so it's true. Those words stick with you. The bruise is going to heal, but the word lasts. Obviously, that academic stress, our kids have so much more pressure than we did at their age and stage of life. And I think that continues, whether it's academic or athletic or just social pressures. You add that to the fact that people are all the time on social media and posting and sharing and liking and not liking, just that whole stress. Obviously, negative feedback, that made sense to me. But this is the one that stuck out as like high praise. That praise can be a significant factor in, I'm reading this, low self-esteem. Here's this, psychological scientific journal. What it found is that overly positive, inflated praise sets an unattainable standard. And so even by and looking at our kids, and our three are so different, I had to start reconciling with, I've got a kid that's really good at so-and-so. And so if I praise that all the time and I compliment that all the time, my kid that's good at something else somehow might be internalizing, because I'm not good at that, I'm not as worthy as she. Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness. So like even overly inflated praise can be a thing that we have to like really guard against. Like,
or even the thing that they're good at. If we praise them for that over and over again, my worth is in this.
Yes, that's
this is why I'm
exactly
valuable.
What happens
because I'm good
if
at
I
this.
get a
I don't do this
99
anymore,
instead of a 100?
yes.
Yep. Yeah.
You know?
So yeah, it was just kind of new information to say, oh, I even have to guard the praise, or even have to, what place is that coming from? And what's the motivation behind it? Is an encouragement that's meant to foster the effort, or am I only celebrating the achievement? Because that makes such a difference.
That's it. That's something I was thinking about too, is effort versus achievement, and
100%.
figuring out how to celebrate. You worked so hard, like way to spend all of that time working so hard to this goal that you had, as opposed to you made it past the finish line. That's great. That is a great thing to celebrate. But where are we putting the emphasis? Is it the effort or the achievement? I love that. That's really good.
Because in effort, no matter if they fail, they still feel
They still put in a lot of time and hard work, and they grew in the process in some way.
Well, this kind of pushes us into the whole conversation about resilience, because we don't want to we're not going to raise kids that are good at everything, but how do we raise kids who can handle hard things? What are the things about self-esteem that we want to foster that will help develop an appropriate confidence, not a pride or an arrogance, but how to develop that kind of resilience that comes in the ability to navigate situations?
I read something that kind of leads into that question that you just have, and it talks about the parent's role with our kids, that two ends of the spectrum that we can have a tendency to land on. One is being over involved. And when we are over involved, it means that we are fixing our kids' problems for them, or we're protecting them from every sort of rejection or, what other people say. And so we're almost overstepping and not allowing them to figure out how to maneuver situations and to maneuver conflict and relationships with people. And then you have sometimes over-involved too can include being very critical or very harsh with your kids, right? And then you have the other extreme, which is unsupportive and absent, like you go figure it out, the suck it up, you're on your own, take care of this. When we have such a beautiful role of hearing them, being a safe space where they can come to share, this is what's going on, and we want to foster that environment, and recognizing that what they're going through and what they're feeling, we don't want to dismiss. It's big. It's big for them. It's big in their world, but also allowing them to come up with suggestions in how maybe they can navigate this. Well, how do you think maybe you could handle that situation? Or what does that situation have a tendency to tell you about who you are? Well, let's talk about who you really are according to the Lord. And so we have to find that balance. And it kind of, as they get older, we give them more and more space to practice that resilience, right? To practice that independence. But every step we're guiding along the way, and we want to be that space where they can come.
I love that, because sometimes we're just quick to go to the solution. Like our kids ask us a question or they present a problem, and we immediately give them the solution without telling them all the internal processes and all the experiences that we have that helped us arrive at that conclusion.
Yeah.
But with a dialogue and asking them questions and input and like, well, how do you see this? What do you do? Helps them get to the spot where they can confidently navigate whatever the situation is. That's a good one.
Which goes back to what we've said time and time again. Parenting is for the long game, not just short.
Gosh, Chase, why do you have to keep reminding us of that?
Short
I want to put
answers.
solution, so can you get there, please?
Yeah, I know. It's so difficult just having the dialogue, having the conversation, and because it's exhausting. I mean, you got, and sometimes you go round and round and round about the same topic, about the same issue, but we got to ask the question: Is it worth our while? Mm-hmm. And the answer is yes. We just have to figure out how to make time for it.
Yeah.
And we can't always fix it.
We can't always
and
fix it.
honestly, that's sometimes that's the exhausting part. Is we think we have the solution, and maybe we don't have the solution for whatever that moment is, but it's hard.
Yeah. There's an idea of a picture in my head of what would be an appropriate self-esteem, an appropriate self-worth. But then there's also this imaginary gray line in it which says, hey, this is this is arrogant, this is proud, this is self-seeking. Like there's a gray line between humility and self-deprecation and confidence and pride. So how do we figure out where those are? Is it different for every kid? Is it different for every individual? Does it change based on the situation? How do we foster good self-esteem without developing prideful monsters? And how do we celebrate humility without fostering self-deprecation? Like where's some balances there?
I think that's a hard question. I think
that's why we brought you here.
Right, here I am. And the more we know our kids, the more we can kind of see behind some of those things. But to do something with humility really is doing something for the glory of God, and to show someone else the love of God. And so when you're self-deprecating, it's, well, I'm really no good at that, or we shouldn't get credit for it. But it's you're coming back to those I statements, and so I think that's the difference between doing something in humility, doing it because we recognize the bigness of the love of God, and so we want others to see the bigness of the love of God, and that it's the why behind what they're doing.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
It goes back to that motivation.
It is the motivation behind it. It's the why behind it.
And I'm guilty of this. Sometimes the motivation behind self-deprecation or a low self-esteem is attention.
And
because
recognition.
I need that feedback. I need
Yes.
those words of affirmation. And I think I even see that in kids, having done kids ministry. Sometimes the thing that you get when you say something negative about yourself is that immediate attention or that immediate positive reinforcement. And what a kid is telling me is that, hey, words of affirmation are my love language and I need you to give me more.
Yeah.
And I get that. I understand that. But we also want to see where that navigates towards, is this something you said in the moment to get some attention because you're not getting one of your needs met? Or are these part of your core beliefs? Like, do you really believe this about yourself? Because if so, we got to change the narrative.
For sure.
Yeah.
It's like, where are they pointing the attention? Where are we pointing the attention? We're always shining a flashlight somewhere. It's either on ourselves with needing attention, and maybe it's self-deprecation type of thing, or we're shining the flashlight on others saying, look how awesome they did at that, how they're celebrating the friends around them. And I think that's sometimes where we see the humility versus the self-berating, the self-deprecation, the negative self-talk that we see. Where are we shining the flashlight?
Yeah. And I think there's something that you just said, Nick, that's so important, because one of our children was more maybe dramatic than the other children. No names on here. And so sometimes it was hard to know, were we wanting attention, or is there something really just really going on underneath there? But I think if they are looking for attention, there is something big going on underneath there.
Yeah.
And so to just skip over it, you're just being dramatic. You're just being, it's to sit down and press in. So tell me why you said that. Like what is it that you're wanting in saying that or doing that? And let's talk about the why. Let's talk about who you are. Let's talk about what the Lord says about who you are. What the Lord would want for you to do in this moment. And so we just really need to pay attention. Pay attention, pay attention, pay attention.
Yep.
Yeah. We are archaeologists of our kids. We got to dig and find what's beneath the surface.
But what an incredible role.
And everything. I love it. Yeah.
What an incredible role.
Yeah.
Well, I think we can kind of, again, we knew that this was not going to come to a conclusion, that this was going to be a to be continued moment. Because anything else that we've talked about, sin, how do you grapple with like your own sin? How do you acknowledge and help your kids understand when they've made a mistake, what that looks like? We've talked about prayer. We've got so many conversations coming up.
Yeah.
They all have at their root and at their core, what does a kid think about themselves and how do they understand the way the world perceives worth and value? Those are all really influential in the moment. And so we want to keep this conversation going.
For sure.
You have already said yes to coming back, Kathy.
I'm
So
in.
we'll get a date for a future conversation about worth in our kids and what we do to develop that resilience. We hope that you'll continue listening as we have really just conversations, and we prompt you to think thoughts about, what do we say? What do we do? How do we react when the world presents all these challenges, when our own sin nature rears its ugly head, and when our kids ask really tough questions or even offer us clues as to what they're really thinking about life?
Right.
We're going to keep doing this, having these conversations together. Can I pray us out?
Yes,
Yep.
please.
Father, we're thankful for this day, thankful for the chance to gather and have conversations about worth and value. We know that all of our worth, all of our value comes from the love that you have for us. It's not something we earn. It's not something we can lose. It comes from your goodness, your implanted value, your image in us, and from Christ who redeems us. Help us to know that, but then also to live it in such a way that impacts this next generation that you've entrusted to us. Thank you for my friends here today and the influence that they have over their own children and the impact that they have on me personally and what we get to do together as a team. We love you, Jesus. We thank you for this day and for this important conversation. Amen.
Amen.
What to Say When is part of the Rolling Hills Podcast Network, available on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and Google Podcast. Be sure to subscribe now as we take off on this incredible parenting journey together.